Previously, on the fan of history, Sargon II, king of Assyria, became king of Babylon. So, Sargon II starts out this decade in Babylon. He has ruled Assyria since 722 BC. He has had plenty of successful campaigns that we have talked about. But he still has three arch enemies: Argishti II of Urartu, the Chaldean Merodach-Baladan of the BC tribe, and King Midas of Phrygia. So Merodach-Baladan himself is in exile in Elam. He ruled Babylonia as king for 12 years before he fled from the attack of Sargon. And the BC tribe in the sea land, they are still loyal to him, and I bet the other Chaldeans would also prefer Merodach-Baladan, who did a pretty good job as king of Babylon. Merodach-Baladan wants the throne back. King Argishti II of Urartu, his father took his own life in 714 BC after several setbacks. Urartu has been invaded by the wild Cimmerians, the Cimmerians from the Russian steppe. And Argishti is quite busy trying to save his country from the horsemen, but his intentions towards Assyria are still hostile. King Midas is hanging around in what is today Turkey, in Phrygia. He has been influencing the lords of Anatolia to rebel against Sargon. But Midas is also fighting the Cimmerians, the horse lords, at this point. But he's still also plotting against Sargon. What a mess! Can Sargon come through? First, Sargon has to handle the quest of being the king of Babylon. He realizes pretty quickly that he cannot leave Babylon. This is what previous Assyrian kings have done. They've gone to Babylon, they've taken it, and then the Babylonians have rebelled. They put a Chaldean or native Sumerian in the king's chair. So Sargon sticks around in Babylon. And he thinks about this. What is the right way to rule the southern Mesopotamia as an Assyrian king? Very quickly then, because we've seen this before on the show, we have the Cimmerian native population, the city dwellers. They are the friends of the Assyrians. The Assyrians consider these people their brothers. Then we have the Chaldeans in the south. They hate the Assyrians hate them. And they are mostly living in the marches in the sea land of the south. The Kassites are in the eastern foothills of the Zagros mountains, and they don't like the Assyrians anyway. The Arameans doesn't really like anybody except Merodach-Baladan. They're still around, they're still causing chaos. Their language is the easiest to learn ever, so their language is spreading more than they are. A few Aramean tribes are actually loyal to the Assyrian Empire. And further to the east is the mysterious ancient kingdom of Elam that is traditionally always against Assyria. If Assyria could make an alliance or get better relations with Elam, things would change dramatically. So this is Sargon's policy. He will portray himself as a friend of the non-tribal population of Babylonia, i.e. the native Cimmerians. Even before Merodach-Baladan fled to Elam, leading citizens of Babylon and Borsippa, the city of truth and justice, came to Sargon's camp. They were high temple officials, men of great families and scribes, and they offered him the remnants of cultic meals. So, great Assyrian king, here are our scraps. What do you think of them? And Sargon knows that this is a sign that they considered him Babylonian royalty, because only the king of Babylon can eat the remnants of the cultic meals. So, and Sargon was saying that he was the son of Tiglath-Pileser III, who had done a decent job as king of Babylon. So Sargon accepted their gifts, and thus he assumed the responsibility of being the king in Babylon. And he markets himself as a true Babylonian king. He participates in the New Year rites at the temple of Marduk in Babylon, he holds the hand of Marduk, the god of Babylon. He presents lavish gifts to the Babylonian temples. Sargon adds Babylonian royal titles to his official titulary, even outside of Babylonia. Sargon is doing everything right. And then, of course, he blames Merodach-Baladan for everything. Merodach-Baladan, perhaps the best king Babylon has ever seen since 1000 BC, when we started this show. He gets super bad press from Sargon. So Sargon says that Merodach-Baladan had abused and neglected the people of Babylonia. There were some urban hostages somehow that Sargon released, or said he did. Sargon extended tax exemption privileges to major southern cities, notably Uruk, Eridu, Larsa, Kisik and Nemed-Laguda. And I hadn't heard that Merodach-Baladan had revoked these, so that was weird. They were possibly revoked by an earlier Assyrian king. And this was extremely successful in Uruk. Uruk will now become a strong Assyrian ally in Babylonia, and Uruk is in a pretty good position to be a check on the Chaldeans in the marches in the south. So this is great news for Assyria. Well, the neglected countryside that the evil Merodach-Baladan didn't treat well, it's of course restored in northwest Babylonia, and it was probably neglected because this was the way the Assyrian army came, so nobody wanted to live there. But Sargon imports prisoners from the other fronts to populate the area. He hunts down the Arameans that plunder the countryside, and then he restores the stolen statues of deities. They were probably stolen by Sargon or his predecessors. Probably Assyrians are to blame for those thefts, but Sargon puts everything right, and he takes the building projects that Merodach-Baladan had started and puts his own name on them. Sargon doing PR. We have to talk a bit about Cyprus. That's a bit weird, but Cyprus stuff is happening there in this era. 7 kings of Jah sent precious gift to Sargon, and Jah was a district of Yadnana, which is the Assyrian word for Cyprus. Sargon makes a lot of propaganda about this as well. He did defend Salamis, which is a colony of Tyre, and Tyre is a vassal state of Sargon's. He defended Salamis against Greek pirates in the 710s BC. We talked about that. But in 709 BC or 708 BC, there is some sort of unrest on Cyprus. And the Greek Cypriot kingdoms, all the other kingdoms except Salamis pretty much, they are in rebellion against Salamis and Tyre. So the Assyrians have no fleet, and the Assyrians are afraid of the Mediterranean. But Sargon sends Assyrian troops. They are ferried by Tyre, and they land on the island, and of course the Greek Cypriot kingdoms on Cyprus has no chance against Assyrian troops. Sargon is definitely not here on Cyprus because he's still in Babylon. He is too scared. And then Sargon sends an inscribed stele to be erected on Cyprus. And that's standard procedure, I think. But the interesting thing is that this very stele was found in the 19th century. So you can actually see it today. There were also some people called the Papu, and maybe they were people from Paphos. Paphos is to the southwest on this map. And they were hanging out at Sargon's court, and they will eventually cause some trouble. Maybe together with Urartu. But I have done a couple of videos on the history of Cyprus together with Groovy Historian, and you can check them out on my channel or on Groovy Historian's channel. So please do that. In 709 BC, Assyria attacks King Midas, but it's not Sargon, it's the Assyrian governor of Q that leads the assault. Remember in last episode the Assyrians established border fortresses against Phrygia. And now the Assyrian governor of Q is like taking the initiative here, surely with the blessing of Sargon. He makes border raids on provinces controlled by Midas, and it's very successful. And some Phrygian prisoners are taken. So big setback for King Midas. And King Midas has been plotting against Sargon for a long time, but it has always been the Anatolians who fought the Assyrians, and the Phrygians haven't done so. But now actual Phrygians are fighting Assyrians, and the Cimmerians are still invading Phrygia. So King Midas decides to give up, and he sues for peace with Sargon. First he speaks to the Assyrian governor at Q, and this guy who beat Midas, he writes a letter to Sargon and sends it to Babylonia. Sargon receives the letter, and he is really pleased that Midas is offering peace terms. And this then he writes a letter to the Assyrian governor at Q, and this letter has come down to us. We have a lot of Sargon's communication. This is one of the things we have. The orders in the letter are: Mr. Governor of Q, you have done well, but you have to agree to the peace with Midas. You have to return the Phrygian prisoners to Midas, and then you have to install an Assyrian envoy at Midas's court in his capital of Gordium. And King Midas is like, yes, I got the reply I wanted. No heavy tribute, everything looks great. And a formal Phrygian delegation traveled to Babylonia with gifts for just to be safe. They go to Babylonia, they get to Babylonia, Sargon receives them, peace is established. And Midas and Sargon are now allies. You couldn't see that 4 episodes ago, but now they're friends. But the rebellions in eastern Anatolia against Assyrian rule continues. So maybe Midas isn't behind them. Maybe it is Urartu. And in the great inscriptions and Khorsabad, Sargon II blames Urartu. And we'll see later in this episode if there's any truth to that. In 709 BC, Merodach-Baladan shows up again. He is the master of sneaking around. He always gets away, and he always sneaks in without anybody noticing him. He appears in the marches of southern Babylonia. That's the sea land, and he immediately takes control of the sea land and the Chaldean tribesmen, and they're all very happy to follow him again. The king is back. Let's throw out those Assyrians. And the capital of his own tribe is Dur-Yakin. It's modern Tel al-Lam. And now Merodach-Baladan decides to take a stand because he knows Sargon is still in Babylon, the Assyrian royal army is still in Babylon, and there has to be a showdown. And Merodach-Baladan decides that this showdown will have to come in Merodach-Baladan's city of Dur-Yakin. So he fortifies the city. The walls are strengthened, there is a canal dredged from the Euphrates, and the surrounding plain is flooded. This is the same tactic as was used in last episode in the battle at Dur-Athkara. It didn't work then, but maybe it will work now. The Aramean tribes and the Chaldeans, they all rally to Merodach-Baladan. He inspires their loyalty. They want the Assyrians out of Babylonia. And Sargon shows up. He brings the Assyrian royal army because Sargon wants a final showdown. He knows that only the Elamites could beat him once, but Babylonians, he can deal with that any day. And he wasn't there when the Elamites won. And by the way, he denies it all, if you remember. But Sargon comes to Dur-Yakin, he looks at the fortifications and the flooding. He decides that his engineering troops should lay earthen banks across the water. And Merodach-Baladan stations his army on high ground outside the city walls. And Sargon uses his favorite tactic. He charges right at them. Merodach-Baladan gets an arrow in the hand, and then he's wounded. And of course he's a coward, so he decides to flee into the city. The Assyrian army slaughters and plunders anybody who didn't get into Dur-Yakin, and Dur-Yakin is put under siege. But Merodach-Baladan is the master of running away, so he slips away again. The siege is successful. The Assyrians claim Dur-Yakin. They capture it, they plunder it, they tear down the fortification, they deport the people of Dur-Yakin. But Merodach-Baladan is not there. So, where do we send these Chaldeans? Who want the Chaldeans? Let's think about that for a while. The Bityakin tribal lands are split in two. One portion is put under the jurisdiction of the Babylonians, and one portion is put under the Assyrian governor of Gabulu, because there is now an Assyrian province, remember that from last time? In Babylonia pretty much, with Assyrians ruling it. So what do we think of Sargon as the king of Babylon? Well, his reign was pretty free from major disorders in Babylon. If Merodach-Baladan was the 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, Sargon did not do worse than a 7. Sargon stayed in Babylon for the majority of 3 years, until 207 BC. Sennacherib was hanging around in Dur-Sharukin, making sure the rest of the empire was in order, also finalizing the new capital, Sargon city, that Sargon had decided to build, which in fact his son Sennacherib was building. There are plenty of clay tablets going back and forth between Babylon and Dur-Sharukin, and we have many of them, including correspondence between Sargon and his son Sennacherib. Sargon is now so powerful that we can note that 2 kings of Dilmun, which is in the Persian Gulf, they send gifts to the mighty King Sargon of Babylon, not of Assyria. In 708 BC, Kummukhu rebels. Kummukhu is sort of in the upper area of this map. It seems pretty clear that Urartu is behind this rebellion. Mutalu of Kummukhu has been a trusted vassal. We talked about him before. He declares his allegiance to Argishti II of Urartu. Will those Urartians never learn? An Assyrian punitive campaign is sent to Kummukhu. Sargon is still not here. He's still in Babylon. Kummukhu's army is crushed. Mutulu flees to the mountains. Mutulu's family, they are carried off to Assyria and never heard of again. The people of Kummukhu, they fit the bill. They can be deported to the Bityakin area, and the Chaldeans that were captured in Bityakin, they are deported to Kummukhu. Haha! And thus Kummukhu can become a true province of the Assyrian Empire. An Assyrian governor, the main part of the population are Chaldeans from the Bityakin tribe. And here I got to wondering that what would have happened if Urartu and the Chaldeans would have joined up. They are pretty far from each other, but surely they could communicate somehow. And together they could attack Assyria from 2 directions. Maybe they will in the future. Well, Argishti II, he is plotting against Sargon, as we noted now. Urartu was behind the Kummukhu rebellion. He spends most of his time fighting the Cimmerians, but now he is sending ambassadors to stir further rebellion in Cilicia. But Argishti is in for a surprise, because King Midas captures these ambassadors and warns Sargon II of the plot. So it turns out that Midas did not lie to Sargon. He is now with Sargon and against Urartu. So that's pretty discouraging for Urartu. I think the Phrygians fighting the Cimmerians are kind of Urartu's friends, but now Midas shows clearly to Argishti that he is valuing the friendship of Sargon even more. So then Argishti decides to stop. He must have peace with Assyria. So he submits to Sargon II, and this is unheard of. An agreement is reached, and Sargon very magnificently decides to return the statue of Kaldi that he took from Musasir during his great adventure, and return it to Musasir, which is still an Assyrian vassal state. Argishti also sends 500 timbers and workmen to work on the great palace in Khorsabad, which we will talk more about. Khorsabad is Dur-Sharukin, the new capital of Sargon, Sargon city. And now there's finally peace in the north for Sargon. We're getting close to total victory here for Sargon. Peace with Urartu. Midas is his buddy. Only Merodach-Baladan remains free. King Dalta of Olympiad dies in 708 BC. Olympiad is the small sort of Elam related kingdom in the Zagros mountains, and Dalta has been a good Assyrian vassal all his life to 3 Assyrian kings. He was a vassal to Tiglath-Pileser III, he was a vassal to Shalmaneser V, and he has been a faithful vassal to Sargon. But Dalta had several wives, and 2 of his sons feel powerful enough to claim the throne. And his Dalta's son Nibe, he decides that he needs the cooperation of Elam, he needs the support of Elam to make him king of Illipi. And maybe he was thinking of that time in 720 BC when the Elamites actually beat Sargon's army. But that's a mistake, because his half-brother then, Ispabara, he turns to Sargon for help. And Sargon is nearby, right? He is in Babylon. How convenient. And King Shutur-Nahunte II of Elam, he already chickened out of defending Merodach-Baladan once. But this time Shutur-Nahunte II sends an Elamite army to help Prince Nibe to become King Nibe of Illipi. And Sargon goes there together with the Assyrian army. He crushes the Elamites. He installs Prince Ispabara as the king of Illipi, and Ispabara promises to be a loyal vassal just like his father was. Sargon is very pleased. I'm sure a lot of Medes show up and pay their respect, because the Medes are scared of Sargon. In 708 BC we also have the 18th Olympiad, and here we have 3 winners that we know of. Tellis of Sicyon wins the stadium race, 1 lap around the stadium. Eurybatus of Laconia, that's from Sparta, he wins the wrestling. Lampis of Laconia wins the pentathlon, and the pentathlon is a new event for this year. It includes running the stadium race, then 200 meters, running the Diaulos, the double stadium race, running the Doulikos, which seems to vary in length, also jumping and the discus throw. In the jumping in the archaic Olympics, the jumpers had stone or lead weights called halteres, and they thought that these weights could increase the distance of jump. So they held onto the weights until they almost landed from the long jump and then threw them backwards, thinking that this would propel them forward. And you don't see that in the Olympics today. Maybe because it's cheating, maybe because it's so efficient that you can't do that. The discus was originally made of stone and later of iron, lead or bronze. The technique to throw the discus was very similar to today's freestyle discus throw. Sweet sport news. In 707 BC, Shabaka, the pharaoh of Egypt, dies. He was the brother of Pi. He counts as the second pharaoh, the 25th dynasty. The year of his death is quite uncertain. Earlier people thought that he died in 702 BC, and the dating of Egyptian things always very difficult. But in 1999 an Egypt-Assyrian synchronism from the great inscription of Tang-i-Var in Iran was rediscovered and reanalyzed. This is an inscription by Sargon, dated to around 706-707 BC. It reveals that it was Shebitku who extradited King Yamani of Ashdod into Sargon's hand, and not Shabaka as previously thought. We talked about this, and I placed this event earlier, and the event probably occurred earlier, but Sargon talked about it here. So Sargon says, I plundered the city of Ashdod. Yamani, its king, feared my weapons, and he fled to the region of the land of Meluna, that's Egypt, and lived there like a thief. Shapataku, which people then think is Shebitku, but it sounds a bit like Shabaku, doesn't it? King of the land of Melua, heard of the might of the gods Ashur, Nabu and Marduk, which I have demonstrated o'er all lands. He put Yamani in manacles and handcuffs. He had him brought captive into my presence. Thus Sargon says that Shebitku did this. So then we need... then it must have occurred in 707 BC and not in the last decade, as I said. Very complicated Egyptian dating. There has been suggested that it was a co-regency between Shebitku and Shabaka, but that has been... not many historians believe that anymore. Shebitku becomes the pharaoh whenever Shabaka dies. He is the son of Pi and the nephew of Shabaka, and he will rule Egypt until 690 BC, but he will be much less famous than his successor. We got something from China finally. In 707 BC, King Huan fights Duke... why do I have to pronounce these things? Duke Xuan of Cheng. Chinese speakers, please correct me. The rivalry between Duke Xuan and King Huan turns into open war. We talked about Duke Xuan before. And this year there is the Battle of Tsuge. King Huan is wounded by an arrow in the shoulder, and Duke Xuan wins the battle, as far as I understand, and keeps doing whatever the hell he wants, and he doesn't care that the king is hostile to him. Duke Xuan is around for quite a while. He's the Duke of Cheng from 743 to 701 BC, and this defeat seriously hurt the prestige of the royal house of the Eastern Zhou dynasty, which was already not as great as it used to be when they were the Western Zhou. In our next episode, Sargon will die. He will return to his new capital, he will work on it a bit, and then he will die like no other Assyrian king has died before him. His death is unique among Assyrian kings, and we'll talk about it in the next episode. Please check out the Fan of History podcast. We publish it on this YouTube channel, but it's also on iTunes, and it's way ahead on iTunes. It's also on Stitcher and several Android platforms. You can talk history with me on facebook.com/fanofhistory. I'm on Twitter as Dan Horning. We have a WordPress site, don't look at that. You can support this show on Patreon, patreon.com/fanofhistory. And the important thing about the Patreon is that we are trying to reach $30 per episode. So please, if you can, support us with $1. And if we can reach $30 an episode on Patreon, we will continue the podcast beyond 701 BC. This YouTube show is ending 701 BC, but the podcast doesn't have to end. We want to go into the 7th century BC. We want to see Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon, the fall of the Assyrian Empire, the rise of Neo-Babylonia, and all the stuff the Greeks are up to in the 7th century BC. Please help us cover this. I now work full-time as a YouTuber and podcaster, and this is one of the projects I really love, but it's far less successful than any other project. So I know you're out there. I know you like this. Some people like this show. And if you like this show, please tell us by contributing on our Patreon. That's my plug for Patreon. Thank you for listening and watching, and we'll be back with the death of Sargon II, king of Assyria and Babylonia.